Alright, the question for today is what is the Age of Enlightenment and what were the effects on the people of the 18th century, but also what we can see today? First off is the Age of Enlightenment. Basically, this was an intellectual cultural movement where intellectuals and educated individuals basically advocated knowledge, and one of their war cries essentially was dare to know. This is influenced greatly by the scientific revolution, by people like Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton, where they discovered and used actual observation to understand the world around them. So this was taken a step further in the 1700s, to where they tried to discover the world around them in various other different fields like economics or government. So they took this another step further from the scientific field and tried to apply it to everyday life. So this is sometimes also called the Age of Reason, where they try to use the world around them, empirical data, actual evidence, to try figure out what's going on around them instead of relying on writings by people in the past or other major groups like the church or government. So they try to discover all of this on their own. Essentially, there is widespread skepticism of everything around them, so they're trying to rediscover everything around them. So people start questioning the Bible, they start being critical, certainly of some of what the Bible says, as well as pretty much everything around them. Government officials, how things are run, and they start to try investigate all these different facets of life. Now, this is generally only going to affect the upper class citizens in Europe at this time, because they're the ones who know how to read and write. The peasants, the farmers, they don't have the time to learn the language of their land, whether it be German, French, or English, Russian, take your pick. So this is generally going to be influenced by the intellectuals, the aristocrats, the wealthy members of society. So keep that in mind. Now, just a few of the figures that are influential in this era. One is going to be John Locke, for example. He thought of the idea that people have a blank slate, tabula rasa. They aren't influenced by their parents, for example, or they aren't born and they have all these different ideas already ingrained within them. They are shaped by their environment rather than ingrained within their brains or their skulls at the point of being born. So people can be shaped or changed through their environment. Another individual, Montesquieu, advocated the idea of separation of powers. He did this through analyzing separate governments in Europe at the time, for example, the French government and the English government mainly, and he determined what would be an effective government. This is coming off of some of the ancient Greek writings, for example. Plato looked into government, and many other different ancient writers also looked into government. So he has a play off of this, and he does it in his own time. What comes out of it is, of course, the idea of separation of powers, where you're going to have different branches of government don't have complete and total power, and that's going to make a far more stable and compromising government. He's comparing England and France, where England does have an element of separation of powers with the constitutional monarchy, with Parliament and the king separated. We have Voltaire. He had the ideas of religious toleration. He came up with this philosophy or this idea of deism, where there's a belief in God, but essentially God put all these different matters of life and started it when he created the universe, and earth and humans, where he put all the laws of the world in place. Gravity, for example, he put the sun in place, the rotations, and all of this other different stuff, in place, and then it's just running as a clock, and it's up to humans to discover it. So this is one way that a lot of different intellectuals of the time basically believed in God, but also were advocating for investigating all of these different theories. And that really afforded some religious toleration, because just because you're a scientist or being a skeptic of the Bible or any of the writings surrounding Jesus or God, they could still practice and be loyal and religious with that faith. So that had basically a compromise between the two worlds. We also have Adam Smith. He's an economist during the later portions of the 1700s. He developed this idea of laissez-faire, which is the idea that the government is going to have hands off of government. The economy will run itself, and the government cannot influence it. They will not influence it through tariffs or taxation or giving benefits or bonuses to certain economies. And this is a system that is in place in a lot of different parts of the world, certainly today. He also believed in open trade, where there aren't going to be tariffs on certain goods, and so there's a free open market for the economy. Basically, Adam Smith is trying to criticize the mercantilism type of economic system. And what mercantilism is the wealth factors is going to be gold and silver, and whoever's the most powerful country is going to have the most gold and silver in the world, and that's going to dictate how much wealth you have, and that's going to be the monetary value of the time. He is trying to get away from that by saying that there isn't a fixed amount of gold and silver. Value can be shaped by whatever goods are being produced during the day. It doesn't have to be gold and silver. It could be electronics. It could be metals. It could be paper. Look at today. We use paper money, and it's backed by the government because government says so. It's not backed by a certain amount of gold per dollar. So what he's saying is wealth can be made. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fixed amount of resources in the world. We'll get to the influence of all this a little bit later. And then finally we have Rousseau. Rousseau is a Frenchman, and he had this belief of a social contract with government and the people. This social contract being that the government is supposed to take care of the people, look after them, make sure that they are, for example, defended from invading armies. They have roads, they have canals and systems in place so they can get from point A to point B, live their lives. In exchange, the people will give up taxes to pay for all these goods and services. Now, the difference here is if the government breaks that contract, the people have the right to rebel and overthrow the government to put into place a government that they would actually want and like. This is the contract. If the people do what they're supposed to do and the government does what they're supposed to do, life is good and everyone is in agreement and everyone hopefully will be happy. But if there's a break in that contract, whether it be from the government side or the people side, stop paying taxes, for example, or imprisoning people without any reason, that will certainly break that contract and give the right for people to rebel. Alright, so the significance of all of this. Much of the significance, many of you probably can understand, is going to be the United States of America. Many of the founding fathers read these articles. They were educated. They did know how to read these articles. They read on the blank slate. They read on separation of powers, the social contract, the economic system, religious systems. And so when you see the creation of the United States, certainly with the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and then later on the formation of an effective government in 1789 with the United States Constitution, they employ all these different writings. There is an open trade system. They do have a social contract. They rebelled against Britain because they believed that they were being slighted against and that that contract was broken. And you had separation of powers, for example, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. All these different ideas greatly influences the United States, its creation, its formation, and the reason why it comes into being. Later on, the French Revolution is going to be influenced by these ideas, and in part due to the success the United States is going to have. We'll get to the consequences and how that French Revolution happens at a later date. But this is going to affect the upper class and lower class society in Europe as well as abroad. Many of these ideas are going to be passed on, certainly to the Americas, and then when the British and the French and the Europeans go abroad into, for example, Africa and Asia, certainly India, they bring these ideas with them. Part of the motivation for them to go abroad was this laissez-faire and the conquering of resources. To be more powerful than the rivalries that exist in Europe, but also this economic system. So when they go abroad, they bring this economic system of free trade and trying to make money out of cotton and various other resources. They're going to bring with them these ideas of separation of government and social contracts, and many of these peoples in Africa and India and Asia are going to borrow these ideas bit later. These ideas are going to come to fruition in the 1900s, certainly after World War II. They did learn about these ideas much earlier, but they had the capability to put that into action much more readily in the 1900s. So these ideas are certainly going to benefit the local populations, the lower and upper classes. It is going to be a struggle. It's not going to be an easy transition. Most people don't want to give up their role in life or their power in life, and that's certainly going to be the same here in this example. It is going to change and shape countries in Europe as well as abroad. So this greatly affects the path of the world from this point onward. It's not going to be a fast process, certainly, but within 100 years, you're going to have the United States being created, you're going to have the French Revolution, and then later on, many of these ideas are going to hit places like Vietnam, China, various other countries. There's just way too many to name at this point. So that's by and large the impact it's going to have on certainly the individuals in the 18th century, but also in the current day. Massive repercussions. And of course, we'll revisit some of these when we look into other aspects of history. Thank you.